Let's start with something real. You've probably been told, at some point in your life, that if you just work hard enough, the money will come. Study hard, get a good job, show up on time, be grateful, and somehow, one day, it'll all add up to a life you're proud of. And maybe you believed it. Maybe you still do. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a quiet suspicion that the math doesn't quite work. That the people around you, who are actually building wealth, real wealth, not just a decent paycheck, seem to be playing by a different set of rules. Rules nobody told you about. Rules that weren't passed down at the dinner table because nobody at your dinner table knew them either. That's exactly what Rashad Bilal and Troy Millings built Earn Your Leisure to address. And that's exactly what this book is about. Bilal and Millings grew up together in New York, best friends since they were kids playing basketball in the Bronx. Both of them were fascinated by money from early on. How it moved, who had it, why some people seemed to accumulate it while others, working just as hard, never got ahead. After high school, they went different directions, Troy into education, Rashad into financial advising, but the question never left them. Eventually, they launched a podcast, mixing what they called barbershop conversations with Wall Street. The response was overwhelming. Millions of people, most of them black and brown, had been hungry for exactly this conversation. A conversation about money that didn't talk down to them, didn't assume they'd grown up with a financial safety net, and didn't pretend the system was fair. This book is the distillation of everything they've learned from that platform. It's practical. It's direct. It's culturally specific in a way most personal finance books are not. And it starts before any strategy, before any investment advice, before any talk of stocks or real estate, with something most finance books skip entirely: the psychology of where you came from and how that affects every financial decision you make today. Part 1. The Inner Game. Healing your relationship with money. Bilal and Millings open the book with a concept that might feel uncomfortable at first: financial trauma. Not trauma in the loose, social media sense of the word, but genuine, documented, psychological patterns that form when you grow up in financial scarcity, and that follow you into adulthood in ways you might not even recognize. Think about what it actually felt like to grow up watching your family struggle with money. Maybe it was the moment the lights got cut off and your parents pretended everything was fine. Maybe it was the specific way tension filled the house at the end of the month. Maybe it was watching a parent work 2 jobs and still fall behind. Maybe it was being the kid who couldn't go on the school trip because it cost $40. Those experiences don't just become memories. They become beliefs. Deep, often unconscious beliefs about what money means, who gets to have it, and whether you are the kind of person it flows to or the kind it flows away from. And those beliefs, not your income, not your credit score, not your knowledge of compound interest, are often the biggest obstacle between you and financial freedom. Bilal and Millings identify several of the most common money beliefs that hold people back. The idea that talking about money is rude or taboo, a belief that kept financial literacy locked out of entire communities for generations because the conversation simply never happened. The belief that wanting wealth is greedy or selfish, a belief that makes you self-sabotage every time you get close to something good because somewhere inside, you don't think you deserve it. The belief that rich people are fundamentally different from you, luckier, smarter, more connected, born into something you weren't, a belief that makes wealth feel like it belongs to another category of human being entirely. And then there's what they call the scarcity mindset, the mental state of someone who grew up with not enough, and whose brain is still running that software even when the circumstances have changed. The scarcity mindset makes you spend impulsively because some part of your nervous system believes the money won't last, so you might as well enjoy it now. It makes you afraid to invest because loss feels catastrophic in a way it might not feel to someone who grew up with a cushion. It makes you take the safe job instead of the bigger opportunity because risk was never a luxury you could afford. The authors are clear about something important here. None of this is your fault. You didn't choose the environment you grew up in. You didn't choose the financial lessons or the lack of them that shaped your earliest understanding of money. But here's the other side of that. Even though it's not your fault, it is your responsibility to change it. Because if you don't examine these patterns consciously, they will run your financial life unconsciously. And unconscious patterns don't care about your income or your intentions. How do you start healing financial trauma? Bilal and Millings suggest beginning with honest examination. What did your parents believe about money? What did the adults around you say out loud or through their behavior about wealth, about ambition, about what people like you could reasonably expect? Which of those beliefs did you absorb? Which ones are still operating in you right now? This isn't therapy for its own sake. It's foundation work. Because you cannot build a lasting financial life on top of beliefs that undermine it. You can learn every strategy in the world, and your mindset will undo them. So the inner game comes first. Part 2. The budget. Your first real tool once you've started examining the mindset. Bilal and Millings move into the practical. And they start where almost every good personal finance conversation starts, the budget. But they frame it differently from how most people think about it. Most people hear the word budget and feel a mix of guilt and dread. It sounds like restriction, like deprivation, like a spreadsheet that's going to tell you all the things you can't have. And because it feels that way, most people avoid it and then feel bad about avoiding it and then avoid it some more. The authors reframe the budget as a tool for freedom, not restriction. A budget doesn't tell you what you can't do. It tells you exactly what you can do and by when. It gives you a map. And right now, if you don't have one, you're driving without a map and then wondering why you're not where you want to be. Their framework for budgeting is clean and memorable. They suggest dividing your income into 4 categories. 15% goes to savings. 55% covers your essential spending, housing, food, transportation, utilities, the things you genuinely need. 20% goes to investing. And 10% goes to sharing, giving back to your community, your family, your faith, whatever that looks like for you. Now, they're the first to acknowledge that these percentages aren't magic numbers, and that depending on where you live and what you earn, hitting all of them simultaneously might not be immediately possible. If you're in a high cost of living city and 55% doesn't cover your rent plus food plus getting to work, you have to adjust. But the framework gives you a target. It shows you what a healthy financial picture looks like, and it helps you identify where the gaps are in yours. One of the most useful things they emphasize in this section is the distinction between fixed and variable expenses. Fixed expenses are the ones that don't change month to month: rent, car payment, insurance, subscriptions. Variable expenses are the ones that shift: groceries, gas, entertainment, eating out. Most people have a rough sense of their fixed costs, but genuinely don't know what they're spending on variable ones. And it's almost always the variable expenses where money is quietly leaking. They also address something that's talked about far too little in personal finance: the financial pressure that comes from family. When you grow up in a community where resources are scarce and interdependence is a survival mechanism, money doesn't just belong to you. Your cousin needs help with rent. Your aunt is in the hospital, and the bills are coming. Your parents are getting older, and there's no retirement savings to speak of. These are real obligations that real people carry, and most personal finance books written from a position of privilege just don't mention them. Bilal and Millings do. And they don't tell you to abandon your family. They tell you to build intentionally with your family situation in mind. Which means building a budget that accounts for what you realistically give, not what you wish you could give. It means having honest conversations with family members about what's sustainable. And it means recognizing that you can't pour from an empty cup, that building your own financial stability is ultimately what gives you the ability to help others over the long term. Part 3. Income. The foundation that is to grow here is where this book starts to feel meaningfully different from a lot of traditional personal finance content. While the classic financial advice universe focuses heavily on cutting expenses and saving diligently, Bilal and Millings push back on the limitation of that approach. Cutting expenses can only take you so far. There is a floor: you cannot spend less than 0. But income has no ceiling. And if your income is the real constraint, then optimizing the spending of a small number is ultimately less powerful than growing the number itself. They introduce a framework for thinking about income that expands most people's picture of what's possible. Most people think about income as one thing, the paycheck from their job. But Bilal and Millings want you to think about income in multiple streams. Your 9 to 5 is one stream. But there are others: a side hustle, freelance work, a small business, investment returns, rental income, royalties, digital products. The goal over time is to have more than one of these flowing simultaneously so that you are never entirely dependent on a single source. This isn't presented as an overnight transformation. They're not telling you to quit your job tomorrow and start a business. They're telling you to think differently about your relationship with income, to see it as something you actively build and diversify, not something that simply happens to you based on where you work. They spend significant time on what they call the 9-to-5 with a side hustle model, which is how many people begin building additional income without the risk of leaving stable employment. A side hustle, done right, is not just about extra money in the short term. It's about building skills, building confidence, and potentially building something that one day produces income without requiring your direct time, which is the transition from earned income to passive income. The examples they give are grounded and real. They're not talking about vague passive income dreams that require you to already have significant capital. They're talking about tutoring, photography, bookkeeping, social media management, reselling, creating digital content, consulting in your area of expertise. Things that real people are doing right now to add a few hundred or a few $1,000s a month to their income. And they're honest about the trade-off. Building additional income streams takes time and energy, and in the short term, that time and energy comes from somewhere. It usually comes from leisure, from sleep, from evenings and weekends. That's a real cost. But it's also, for many people, a temporary one. If the side hustle grows, if it eventually generates income that doesn't require your constant presence, you get that time back. And then some. Part 4. Investing. This is where it actually builds the heart of this book, in many ways, is the investing section. Because this is where Bilal and Millings most directly address the gap they saw in their communities. The gap between people who understood investing and people who didn't, and how that gap compounded over time becomes a wealth gap that spans generations. They start with something foundational. Why investing matters more than saving alone. Saving is essential. Having an emergency fund is non-negotiable. But money sitting in a savings account earning 1 or 2% annually isn't growing in any meaningful way. Inflation is quietly eroding its purchasing power. Meanwhile, money invested wisely, in assets that grow over time, is doing the opposite. It's compounding. It's working for you while you sleep. They walk through the basic landscape of investment options with real clarity. Stocks, ownership stakes in companies, are the most accessible entry point for most people. They explain the difference between buying individual stocks, which requires research and carries more risk, and buying index funds or ETFs, which give you broad exposure to the market without requiring you to bet on individual companies. For most people, especially beginners, they recommend starting with broad index funds because of their diversification and historically strong long-term returns. They also cover bonds, which are lower risk and lower return, more appropriate for people closer to retirement or those with a very low risk tolerance. And they explain the spectrum in between, helping readers understand that investing isn't a single thing but a range of choices that should be matched to your specific goals, timeline, and emotional tolerance for volatility. Real estate gets substantial attention, which makes sense given how much wealth has historically been built through property. They break down several ways to invest in real estate: direct ownership of rental properties, house hacking, living in one unit of a multifamily property while renting out others. REITs, real estate investment trusts, which let you invest in real estate without owning property directly, and the BRRR strategy, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat, which is a method for recycling capital across multiple properties. The real estate section is particularly strong because they don't romanticize it. They talk about the realities of being a landlord, the maintenance, the difficult tenants, the vacancies, the unexpected costs. They talk about the capital requirements and the importance of understanding your local market. Real estate can be an incredible wealth-building tool, but it's not passive in the way a lot of social media real estate content suggests. Going in with clear eyes is essential. They also address the types of investment vehicles that most beginners don't fully understand: the 401k, the IRA, the Roth IRA. The importance of maximizing employer matching in a workplace retirement plan, which is essentially free money that a shocking number of people leave on the table. the difference between pre-tax and post-tax contributions, and why that distinction matters more than most people realize depending on their current income and expected future income. One of the most important things they hammer throughout the investing section is this: start now, even if the amount is small. The biggest mistake isn't investing badly. It's not investing at all. Every month you wait is compounding you're not getting. And the difference between starting at 25 and starting at 35 isn't 10 years of contributions. It's 10 years of exponential growth. The math is unforgiving. Part 5. Passive income. Making money while you're not working. If there's a concept at the spiritual center of this book, it's passive income. And it's worth spending some time really understanding what they mean by it, because it gets thrown around a lot without much precision. Passive income is money that doesn't require your direct, ongoing time to produce. Once the system is set up, it generates revenue without you having to show up. A rental property produces rent whether you're working or sleeping. Dividends from stocks arrive in your account on a schedule. A book you wrote 3 years ago still sells copies. A YouTube channel you built over 2 years still generates ad revenue. The contrast is active income, which is what most of us live on. You work, you get paid. You stop working, the money stops. And the fundamental problem with building a life entirely on active income is that your time is finite. There are only so many hours in a day, only so many years of peak earning capacity. If your income is entirely active, there is a ceiling to what you can build. Bilal and Millings want you to think about passive income not as a fantasy, but as a goal you build towards systematically. The journey usually starts with active income. Your job, your side hustle. You use that income to invest. Those investments eventually produce returns that don't require your direct labor. Over time, if you build enough of this, you reach what they call earning your leisure, the point where your passive income covers your expenses and your time is genuinely yours. They're honest that this takes time. It takes years of discipline building. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme, and they say so explicitly. But the alternative, living entirely on active income for your entire working life with no passive streams, no investments growing in the background, is also a choice. And it's a choice with consequences, primarily the consequence that you will always be trading your time for money, and when you can't or don't want to trade anymore, the income stops. The passive income streams they discuss are varied: dividend-paying stocks, rental properties, peer-to-peer lending, creating digital products or courses, monetizing content, licensing intellectual property, and business equity that generates profit even when you're not directly involved. Some of these require significant upfront capital. Others require time more than money, building an audience, creating content, developing expertise that can be packaged and sold. The key insight is this: passive income isn't magic. It's the result of front-loading effort. The rental property becomes passive after you've done the work of buying it, renovating it, finding tenants, and setting up management systems. The YouTube channel becomes passive after you've spent years making videos. The investments become passive after years of consistent contributions. There's nothing passive about the building phase. But the payoff, having money work for you instead of the other way around, is transformative. Part 6. Taxes and insurance. The game within the game. This section of the book is the one that might genuinely make you say out loud, "Why did nobody teach me this?" Because taxes and insurance are two systems that quietly have enormous impact on your financial life, and most people engage with them either minimally or completely, reactively. On taxes, Bilal and Millings make the point that the wealthy don't just earn more than everyone else. They also pay a different effective tax rate, not by cheating but by understanding the tax code and using it strategically. The tax code is full of legitimate deductions, credits, deferrals, and structures that dramatically reduce the tax burden for people who know about them. Most working people don't know about them because they've never needed to. They get a W-2, they file a basic return, and that's it. But as soon as you start building income streams outside your 9-to-5, a side hustle, a rental property, a small business, the tax picture changes significantly, and so do the opportunities. Business expenses become deductible. Depreciation on real estate can offset rental income. Retirement accounts shelter a portion of your income from taxation either now or in the future. The structure through which you operate a business, sole proprietorship versus LLC versus S Corp, affects what you pay in self-employment taxes. None of this is secret information. It's all in the tax code, but accessing it requires either knowing it yourself or working with someone who does. The authors strongly encourage working with a good accountant, not a tax preparer at a chain that just files your return, but an actual CPA who can help you plan proactively rather than just report reactively. The difference between what a good accountant costs and what they save you is almost always significant. On insurance, the framing is similar. Most people think about insurance as an annoying expense, something you pay for and never want to use. Bilal and Millings want you to think about it as asset protection. You work hard to build wealth. Insurance is what keeps one bad event from wiping out what you've built. They walk through the types of insurance that matter most for wealth builders: health insurance, life insurance, especially term life for people with dependents, disability insurance, and property and casualty coverage. The one they emphasize most strongly, and that is most often overlooked in the communities they serve, is life insurance. Life insurance is not for you. It's for the people who depend on you. If you have children, if you support parents, if you are the financial backbone of a household, and something happens to you, what happens to them? Life insurance is the answer. And term life insurance for most people is remarkably affordable. A policy that would cover your family for decades can cost less than a streaming subscription per month. They also address the trap of whole life and universal life insurance, permanent insurance products that are often sold in lower-income communities as investment vehicles, and express significant skepticism about them for most people. For most individuals, especially those just starting out, term life insurance plus investing the difference in what whole life would have cost is a far more effective strategy. Part 7. The Community Dimension. Building Wealth That Lasts Beyond You. This is the chapter that most distinguishes this book from the rest of the personal finance genre. And it speaks directly to something real about how wealth, and the lack of it, operates in tight-knit communities. Bilal and Millings are writing at their core for Black and Brown communities. And in those communities, wealth isn't just an individual project. It's a communal one. The extended family networks, the mutual support systems, the expectation that if one person makes it, they bring others with them. These are features of these communities, not bugs. They reflect genuine values: solidarity, interdependence, collective survival. But they can also become financial traps if not navigated thoughtfully. When family members know you have money, requests come. Some of them are entirely reasonable. Some of them are not. And the emotional difficulty of saying no to family, especially when you grew up in a context where everyone helped everyone survive, can lead to a pattern where one person's financial progress constantly gets pulled back by obligations that, while genuinely felt, aren't sustainable. The authors don't tell you to stop helping your family. They tell you to help strategically. They suggest building systems instead of just giving cash, helping a family member set up a budget, co-signing on a lease rather than paying rent indefinitely, teaching financial concepts rather than just throwing money at financial problems. They talk about the power of what they call group economics, the idea that a community that circulates money within itself, that invests in Black-owned businesses, that pools resources for investment opportunities, is collectively stronger than its individual members would be alone. They point to historical examples of thriving Black economic ecosystems: Greenwood in Tulsa, Black Wall Street, the mutual aid societies of the early 20th century, and make the argument that the wealth gap between Black and white Americans isn't primarily a result of individual financial failure. It's the accumulated result of systemic exclusion from wealth-building opportunities: redlining, discriminatory lending, exclusion from GI Bill benefits, wage theft, and outright destruction of Black economic progress like the Tulsa Race Massacre. Understanding that history doesn't excuse inaction today, but it reframes the challenge. You're not just trying to get rich. You're trying to overcome a system that was explicitly designed to prevent you from getting rich. That requires more than individual hustle. It requires community and collective strategy. Part 8. Your First Million, and what to do with it in the final major section of the book. Bilal and Millings get into the specifics of what wealth accumulation actually looks like at different stages. culminating in a discussion of what to do when you reach significant milestones, particularly the first $1 million. They start by reiterating their core framework: increase your income, decrease your expenses, invest the difference. This isn't complicated. It isn't secret. But applied consistently over years, it works. The problem isn't that people don't know this. The problem is that life is complicated and the culture we live in actively works against it. Every advertisement is designed to get you to spend. Social media creates constant comparison with people who appear to be living lavishly. Peer pressure to keep up with people in your social circle is real and relentless. Resisting all of that consistently requires intention that most people haven't consciously cultivated. As your income grows and your investments compound, they encourage building multiple income pillars simultaneously: earned income from your career or business, investment income from stocks and bonds, real estate income from property, and eventually business income from ventures that operate partially or fully without your direct involvement. Each pillar makes you more resilient. A person with 4 income streams can lose one and still be okay. A person with 1 income stream who loses it is in crisis. On reaching the first million, they give practical advice that most people never receive. First, understand that $1 million before taxes is not $1 million. After a 37% federal tax rate on gains, you might be working with around $630,000. So the first call after a significant financial event, selling a business, receiving an inheritance, a major investment payout, should be to a financial advisor and a tax professional, not to a car dealership. What do you do with the money? They suggest a structured approach. Pay off high-interest debt first. Establish or reinforce your emergency fund. Then allocate meaningfully to investments, a mix of broad market index funds, real estate if it fits your goals and knowledge, and potentially other assets depending on your risk tolerance and timeline. Avoid the temptation to dramatically upgrade your lifestyle immediately. The classic trap of new wealth is increasing your spending to match your new net worth, which means the million is gone before it ever had a chance to compound. And perhaps most importantly, don't navigate this alone. Wealthy people have advisors. That's not a luxury, it's a strategy. The complexity of managing significant wealth, tax implications, estate planning, asset allocation, insurance needs is real, and the cost of mistakes at that level is significant. Getting good professional help pays for itself many times over. Part 9. Generational Wealth. The real goal. The book ends where it began in spirit, but elevated to its highest ambition: generational wealth. Not just being comfortable in your own lifetime, but creating conditions so that your children start further ahead than you did. So that the financial trauma that shaped you doesn't shape them. So that the knowledge you had to work so hard to find is simply part of how they grow up. Bilal and Millings are honest about the systemic barriers to this in Black and Brown communities, the history of wealth being extracted, stolen, or blocked at every turn. But they're equally clear that the answer is to build anyway. Aggressively. Intentionally. With the explicit goal of leaving something behind. Generational wealth isn't just money. It's knowledge. It's relationships. It's the culture of talking about money openly, of treating investing as normal, of starting kids' investment accounts when they're young, of teaching children what a budget is and why it matters. The wealthiest families in America are wealthy in part because financial knowledge is transmitted across generations the same way that scarcity can be. The goal is to change what gets transmitted in yours. They close with a reminder that feels worth sitting with. The title of this book isn't aspirational. It's assertive. You deserve to be rich. Not because the world is fair, it isn't. Not because hard work automatically pays off, it doesn't always. But because you are as capable, as smart, as deserving of financial freedom as anyone who has ever achieved it. The people who built wealth weren't a different species. They had access to knowledge and systems that you are now holding in your hands. The only question is what you do with it. The critique, where this book is complicated, all right. Let's talk about it honestly, because if we're being real, this book has some things worth pushing back on, and they're worth naming. The first is the title itself, and the frame it creates. You deserve to be rich. It's a powerful statement. It's also one that, taken literally, can become a problem. Because there's a version of "you deserve it" that slides from empowerment into entitlement, from "you are capable of this" into "this should come to you." And in a world where wealth is actually built through sustained, difficult, often uncomfortable effort over many years, that subtle shift in framing can hurt more than it helps. If you read this book and come away feeling like wealth is something you deserve rather than something you build, the message has backfired. Second, and this is the one that's going to hit close to home for a lot of people, some of the income-building advice in this book is easier to act on than it sounds. The side hustle conversation, in particular, assumes a level of time, energy, and bandwidth that people working demanding jobs, raising children, or managing health challenges may simply not have. When you're working 50 hours a week and coming home to a family, the advice to build a side hustle in the evenings sounds great on paper. In practice, it can feel like being told to run a marathon after you've already run one. The book acknowledges this somewhat, but doesn't really sit with how exhausted a lot of its readers might be before they've even gotten started. Third, the passive income conversation, as inspiring as it is, sometimes glosses over how much active effort and capital it takes to get to the passive part. A rental property doesn't become passive until after you've saved the down payment, navigated the purchase, dealt with renovations, found and vetted tenants, set up management systems, and weathered the inevitable surprises. That process can take years and require resources that many readers don't yet have. The dream of passive income is real and achievable, but the path to it is more rugged than the way it's sometimes presented. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly from a practical standpoint, the book covers an enormous amount of ground. Budgeting, investing, real estate, taxes, insurance, side hustles, passive income, generational wealth, it's all here, which is admirable and ambitious. But the depth on each topic is necessarily limited by the breadth. A reader who finishes this book will have a genuinely expanded financial worldview, but will also have a lot of questions that aren't fully answered here. This book is a fantastic starting point and an excellent big-picture framework. It is not a comprehensive how-to guide on any single topic. And finally, the community and systemic elements of the book, which are among its most important contributions, are also the ones most likely to create frustration if the reader isn't careful. Bilal and Millings are right that systemic racism has created and maintained the racial wealth gap. They're right that it's not primarily about individual behavior. And they're also right that, in spite of all of that, individual action still matters and still makes a difference. But holding both of those truths simultaneously, the system is stacked against you and your choices matter, is genuinely hard. And for some readers, the awareness of systemic barriers can tip into paralysis rather than motivation. The book doesn't fully address how to stay motivated in the face of a system that often seems designed to defeat you. That's a harder problem, and it might be beyond the scope of any single book. None of this means you shouldn't read it. You absolutely should. It's one of the most culturally specific, practically oriented, and emotionally honest personal finance books written in recent years. The fact that it was written for communities that have been explicitly excluded from mainstream financial conversations makes it important in a way that goes beyond its tactical advice. But read it with your eyes open. Read it as a framework, not a formula. Take the mindset work seriously. That part is universally applicable and genuinely powerful. Use the practical advice as a starting point and go deeper on the topics that are most relevant to your specific situation. And remember that no book, no matter how good, closes the gap between knowing and doing. That part is still on you. Final thoughts: what separates You Deserve to Be Rich from most personal finance books isn't primarily its strategies. The strategies: budget carefully, invest consistently, build multiple income streams, protect your assets, are solid but not revolutionary. What separates it is the people it's written for and the way it understands their specific challenges. Rashad Bilal and Troy Millings didn't write this book for people who grew up with financial role models, who inherited wealth or financial literacy from their parents, who had the luxury of learning about money in a context of safety and stability. They wrote it for the person who grew up watching their parents struggle and decided that the cycle stops with them. For the person who has the drive but not the roadmap. For the person who is never told that the financial system is rules, that those rules can be learned, and that learning them is how you win. The message underneath all of it is simple and radical at the same time. Financial freedom is not for other people. It is not reserved for the already wealthy, the already connected, the already lucky. The tools exist. The knowledge is accessible. And the belief that you are capable of building something lasting, something that outlasts you, that changes what the next generation inherits, that belief is where it all starts. You deserve to be rich. Now go build it.